Okay, so where are we today? I was telling Jeff, I'm not sure I can remember how to do this. I haven't talked to you in a month. But he said it's like falling off a bicycle. No, it's like riding a bicycle. We might fall off the bicycle instead. This is what we're doing through the summer. We're going through the first 11 chapters of Genesis, the narrative of that, because it's turned into kind of the no man's land for Christianity. No one studies the first 11 chapters because everyone silently is embarrassed by the scientific problems of Genesis 1 through 11. Well, I'm here to tell you there are no scientific problems, and we'll get to the science part in a couple weeks, I think. But until we get to the science part, I just want to march us through it, and we'll look at it, and you'll realize that Genesis 1 through 11 is really not about the science of the universe. It's about God's plan for mankind. And let me show you what I'm talking about. This is the entire overview of the Bible. It starts in Genesis with God, because after all, Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created. Okay, so there we go. And then we get the creation that follows clearly right after that. And then the bad news of this rebellion that happens, the fall that happens. And so things are starting to go kind of awry. And it hits this bottom down here. And then as the Bible goes on, it deals with the issue of that. And there's a rescue that comes. Yay! There's a rescue for the rebellious is what it is. Or to use another R word, instead of rescue, you can call redeemed, which means the rescue cost. Redeem always means it costs something. The rescue or the redeem, or after that, the recreation of us. So something about us which fell can be recreated so that by the end of the Bible, we're back in relationship with God. That's the whole Bible. That's really what the story of the entire Bible is. God creating mankind, mankind falling, mankind bringing that upon himself. Who will rescue? Who will redeem? Who will recreate mankind? That's actually the Messiah, Jesus himself. And the whole story, the rest of it, is how that redemption happens. So that at the end, in Revelation, we're back with God. And that's the story of the Bible. Now, here's why Genesis 1 through 11 is important. Do you know how much of this picture is Genesis 1 through 11? Let's get back to that first. It's this much right here. So if you skip Genesis 1 through 11, you don't know that there's a need for a redeemer. You don't know that there's a need to be recreated. You don't know that there's a need because of our own fallenness. You don't know that our nature as a created being from God is tragically bent and twisted. All that's off the table. If you ignore the beginning of the first 11 chapters of the Bible, there is no need for Jesus. And that's why you got to go back to this. That's why you got to go back. Without a need, without an understanding of the fact that we're fallen, that we're sinful, that we're tragically under the bar to qualify and be God's presence, no amount of wishing in the world is going to get you back in the presence of the Creator. None. And so the whole story of the Bible is how that comes to be. The rest of the Old Testament, which we won't cover today, points forward to Christ. And then in the New Testament, Christ comes, and we understand what he does in recreating us and redeeming us. And then through the rest of the New Testament, we're back with God. You're done. You know the Bible. So let's go in and see where we are today. Today, out of the first 11 chapters, here's really the four major topics. This the creation, you have the fall, you have the flood, remember with the Noah guy, and you have the Tower of Babel and all that kind of stuff. So today we spin our world, and we are in the middle of the fall. So we're still in the fall, actually, is where we're at. And they ate the fruit last time we were there and fell in the garden in chapter 3. That's the last time we were there. But here we have the fall continued. And the fall continues to bring bad fruit in one of the most heinous crimes in the history of the world. Cain and Abel. So here we go. We're going to look at that today. We are in the beginning of chapter of Genesis 4. So let's just see what happens. Now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Well, that's kind of cool. I've always wondered about that and the help of the Lord part. But she knows that there's something more going on than just what she and Adam are responsible for. But they're involved. And then verse 2, again, she gave birth to his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of flocks. That means he did that sheep-goat thing. That's a very bad Sunday school picture of Abel. But Cain, he was a tiller of the ground. So these two guys took different approaches to how to support themselves and how to live off the land that after God pushed Adam and Eve out, said, you're going to have to work the land to feed yourself. They took basically two different approaches, okay? So he's got us all clear about these two guys, Cain and Abel. Now, it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's parts of the Old Testament in terms of the law of Moses where sacrifices are brought to the temple and paid, and they can be done in grain. So that's what he does. He says, this is what's produced from my efforts. I'll give some of this to the Lord. And then Abel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. So, okay, this is sounding pretty good. By the way, before we move on, it's interesting that they both felt compelled to offer something to God. Because they knew, now this is before any law was laid down. There was no one anywhere up till here in chapters 1, 2, 3, and into 4 of Genesis, no one has said, by the way, you need to tithe 10% of what you have. No one said you need to give to God at all. But they understood, and this is an ancient kind of agrarian understanding, they understood that in a real sense, they were like tenant farmers of a piece of land, a piece of real estate that they didn't own. And why? Because God made this place. And so they understood in a very common understanding that we even today have forgotten, but was pretty active even 100 years ago, is that when you tenant farm a piece of land, you give a piece of the proceeds of the land to the person who owns the land. And that's all they're doing right here. That's all that tithing ever was. It was giving back. That's why it's the first fruits. It's like, here's what, God gave us the dirt. Sure, we did other stuff. Since he owns the land, we need to give back to him. It's really, that's what giving to God and tithing especially was all about. That was it. So these guys know reflexively they need to give to God. But there's a problem coming. Have you read this story before? Yeah, there's a problem coming. Watch what happens. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offerings, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. Which raises the $64,000 question, why? And so, in simple interpreters of the Bible, we look at these two verses, and we look at the backgrounds of these two guys, and we say, oh, well, clearly, goats and lambs and sheep are okay. Wheat's bad. You can test that hypothesis, actually. Like I said, you could go later on when the temple's built and there's sacrifice and they're bringing things in sacrifice. Do they bring lambs and goats and bulls and stuff like that? Yeah. Do they bring barley and wheat and flour? Yeah. They're both acceptable. So, you're wrong. It can't be that. It can't be that because eventually those are both acceptable to God. But that's the only thing we know that's different. When we use human eyes, that's all we can see. But the wording of these two phrases tells you what the problem was. Let me try and word these for you in a way. What if on the right it said, and the Lord had regard for the offering of Abel, but God had no regard for the offering of Cain? How is that different from what's read right there?
No regard.
Had no regard for Abel. Or had no regard for Cain and his offering. Had regard for Abel and his offering. It's the man and his sacrifice. Since we already know it's not the difference in the sacrifice, it's the difference. There must be something that's wrong with the man. See that? It's right there. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But for Cain and his offering, no regard. So really, there's something about the nature of the man. And don't be distracted by the fact that there's two different offerings. That's not really the issue right here. We know biblically that's not the issue. And we also know, from looking forward in the Bible, that when God judges an offering, what God does, God does not judge the nature of the offering. He judges the heart of the giver. So in this right here, we can't see the heart of the givers, but we can see the offering. So sometimes we make these rash generalizations because we don't know the full story. It's the heart of the man that's the issue right here. And there was something about Abel's heart that was okay. There was something about Cain's heart that was not okay. And guess what? We're going to find out in just a second what was wrong with Cain's heart, because that's what he's going to talk about next. He's not going to go on to a theological diatribe about why, the fruit of the ground that's wheat and barley, that's really not good to God, because God does not really, you're not going to get that. You're going to get what's wrong with Cain is what you're going to get in just a second. So let's see where he goes. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. I think this is probably a gross understatement. He became very angry, and the Hebrew is quite emphatic right here. You're steaming, really angry. Oh, in fact, there's the word that's used for that is often used for when an angry animal snorts out its nose. If you see angry horses in movies and it's kind of cool outside, you see that stuff coming out. Yeah, no, it's that kind of that comes out like that from an angry animal. That's what that word is. It's very picturesque. It's nice. So he's very angry. And then it says something we're not used to. And his countenance fell. And the word countenance literally means face. So he went like this. His face fell. And that's used idiomatically for lots of things in Hebrew speaking. But really, it's a great visual version of depressed or offended or down, basically, because your face is down. So he's bummed. That's what I would say. So he's angry and he's bummed is what it is. And that's where he's sitting right now. Now, Cain's at a crossroad. He can do one of two things. He can either somehow go to God and say, I don't get it. I'm hurt, but I don't get it. You need to explain this. What have I done wrong? He can do that. Or he can just get angrier and angrier and follow the course of his anger. That's what he does. Watch what happens here. So Cain became very angry and his countenance fell. And then the Lord said to Cain, fascinating phrase, why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? Why is your face down? Listen, God says, here's my clue. If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? Which is, if you do the right thing from this point, which basically is come to me and find out what's wrong, your countenance, you'll be encouraged. You won't be down. And if you do not do well, if you choose poorly, sin is crouching at the door and its desire is for you, but you must master it. So he's really at a very clear fork in the road, and God's giving him a gigantic clue. He's giving him a gigantic clue. If you go the humble way, come to me, ask what's wrong, let's work it out. Then the bottom line God promises is that your down face will become an up face. I think this is meant to be a teaching moment for Cain, because God's saying, this can be great for you. If your face is down, we can lift it up. And all through the scriptures, we see places, especially in the Old Testament, where someone is down and they're lifted up, and God lifts them up. And that's all God's saying is, come to me and I'll lift your face. But if you go the wrong way, sin is crouching at the door. Oh my gosh. Did you ever read that short story about the tigers behind the doors? Does anyone remember that? It's a short story where you have to pick one of 3 doors, and behind one of them there's a tiger that will kill you. It had to be very careful about which one you picked. Anyway, okay, I guess we're not very literary here. But yeah, let's make a deal, yeah. Door number 1, number 2, number 3. Well, anyway, it's the same kind of thing. He's saying, if you open the wrong door, and all you have to do is just open the wrong door, you're going to let in sin, and it's like a wild animal that's crouching there, waiting to eat you. And all you have to do is open the door. Now, it's fascinating because up to this point in the garden, we've had the serpent who's deceived Eve up to this point. And he was very clearly taking advantage of the moment with Eve. And now, personified in Satan, he's there ready in a deliberate way to take advantage of Cain's anger. And God is saying, don't open that door. Because there's many implications. Because if you open that door, you will not be able to resist what comes in. And that thing that comes in is not coming in for your well-being. It's coming to eat you. So in one fell swoop, God's saying, you do have a choice. And in this particular choice, if you open that wrong door, you're suddenly vulnerable like you've never known you were vulnerable before. You won't be able to stop it. You're toast. That's what it is. Now, some of us who have voluntarily opened the door to evil in our lives, hey, all of us have. I'm just not, okay, all of us have. You suddenly find that in the freedom of opening any door I want to, I'm going to be my own person and the master of my own ship. I'm going to open this door. And this thing comes in which looks good at the start. But very quickly, you understand that it is not there for your best interest, like it promised on the other side of the door. Before you open the door, it's saying, let me in. You'll love it. It's great. It's the best thing in your life. Don't miss this opportunity. Oh, it'll change you forever. And you go, hey. And you open the door, and then in a very short amount of time, you find out it's not meant for your good. It's meant for your evil, and it's overpowering. Anybody been there? This is sin. This is sin, and this is what Satan can do in our lives without the power of Jesus, without the power of the Holy Spirit to be able to deal with this. Because James later says, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. But that doesn't work until Jesus is in you. Before Jesus is in you, you're a sitting duck. You open wrong doors that entice and promise, and then soon you find that you're not free and at liberty to do whatever you want. Now you find you're actually enslaved to that thing that you opened the door to. the vast majority of mankind who does not know Jesus have opened doors that have enslaved them. And that's why when Jesus pointed back to the prophecy in Isaiah when he was in his hometown temple, synagogue, he said, through Isaiah, he said, I came to set the captives free. Well, what captives did Jesus in his 3-year ministry set free? Real prisoners in prisons? No. Real sinners caught up with opening the wrong doors and allowing Satan and his sin to capture us. And we're stuck. So this is what's going on. God's telling him, be wise right here. Be wise right here. Because the promise in the beginning of 7, I can lift up your face if you come to me. That's really what he's saying. I can make this good. This is not a permanent thing that's happened here with this judgment of your offering. We can make this good. But don't open that other door. So that's where he's at. Unfortunately, Cain told Abel, his brother. And it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel and his brother and killed him. So what did he say to his brother Abel when he went in the field? We don't know. We don't know. This is where the godly speculation cuts in. But surely, in working this out, Cain goes to Abel. And I think he might have just said, you know what, God accepted your offering, but he didn't take mine. Now, what's that all about? That's Jim's holy kind of speculation about. What's that all about? I think he went to his brother to try and figure out what's going on. He should have gone to God to figure out what's going on. But instead, he went to his brother. He went to his brother, and he probably got a very unsatisfactory answer from his brother, like, I don't know. We don't know what happens out there. But clearly it doesn't turn things for the better. He gains no understanding that drives him back to God in humility where God could lift his face. That's not going to happen. Instead, whatever happened out in the field between what they said made Cain so angry he killed his brother. There's more than meets the eye in this. There's real theology in this. Because when you get into false religion, that is, people who try and please God based on a system that men have devised, it always seems to come back to elevating yourself above somebody else so that God will accept you. And if you can't seem to figure out how to elevate yourself above the people that seem to be doing really good, you secretly hate them and you plot their demise, and in Cain's case, you kill him. Because for Cain, Abel is getting in his way to fellowship with God. Because Abel seems to be more able to please God. See, you'll remember that now. Okay, so that's the whole deal. For Cain, the issue is to restore his relationship with God, he's got to get rid of the guy who seems to be doing better than him. And that's the stratification that goes on in false religion. It's always about who's better than somebody else, and you're always either overachieving to do that, or if you just can't get there, frustration, and you hate that person, you push him off the side, which is equivalent, Jesus says, to killing. So this is what's going on. Cain is ticked at God, so he kills his brother, who God loves. Totally wrong. And now he opened the door thinking that he has gotten rid of his competition with God, and God now has to take, the second place guy. Bad thinking. Bad thinking. This is all false religion right here. So then the Lord says to Cain, where's Abel, your brother? And then one of the most famous lines in the entire Bible, do you know this? Yeah. I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? I don't know. I don't keep track of him. Not my day to watch him. By the way, Abel is called a keeper of his flock. That's the same kind of word. It's like, who's watching over the stupid animals? Well, it's not my day to watch over the stupid animal, Abel. It's your job, God. That's what he's implying. So God says, listen, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. See, God knows all this stuff. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. And when you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You'll be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. Now remember, when God pushed Adam and Eve out of the garden, he did say to Adam, you'll be able to feed yourself by cultivating the ground. Remember that? He says, you'll be able to, that'll work. It won't be as easy as walking up to the trees and going, oh. In fact, to this day, every time I see a fruit tree, it reminds me of God's promise that he wants to feed me and not have to make me sweat for it. He wants to provide luscious, wonderful. It's an echo from the garden that says, instead of having to till the ground, just pop one of these babies off and eat it. I mean, it's a beautiful, luxurious, it's probably the most luxurious food on the earth, walking up to a ripe fruit tree or grapes. I mean, it's really a luxurious present from God. Well, he said, I'm going to kick you out of the garden, but you'll still be able to till the ground. You'll still be able to, but it's going to take a lot of hard work to kind of coax that stuff out of the ground to eat it. Not like just walking over these trees. You're going to have to work it. Now he's saying to Cain, his son, that's not even going to work anymore. Just for Cain. Yeah. No matter how hard you sweat and toil. It's not going to work. You're cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. And when you cultivate the ground, it'll no longer yield its strength. You'll be a vagrant and a wanderer. Why a vagrant and a wanderer? Because everywhere you go to cultivate the ground, it won't work. You're going to have to go somewhere else where there's already food growing. Vagrant and wanderer. You're going to have to be constantly on the move to find your food. You won't be able to settle down anywhere and cultivate. You're going to be wandering. You're going to wander all over the world just getting your food. No place will work for you. Yeah, this is God's justice. This is his, and in fact, when you talk about God's justice, I'm going to ask you this question, and then you can answer it in a couple minutes. Why didn't God just blot Cain off the face of the earth? Okay, hold on to those thoughts. So anyway, here's the thing. You're not going to be able to cultivate the ground. You'll be a vagrant and a wanderer. And then Cain said, my punishment is too great to bear. It's too great to bear. That is, you mean I'll have to wander all the time to get food? But interestingly enough, what it is that's too great to bear is not just the food issue. And Cain, right after this, tells us what it is he understands the consequences of this, which is too great to bear. He says it himself. Here it comes. He says, what's too great to bear? 14. Behold, you've driven me this day from the face of the ground. Okay, we got that part. And from your face I'll be hidden. So he understands that he's being pushed out of the presence of God himself. So even though they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God is still having some kind of present influence on Adam and Eve and the kids. God is still there. Cain's understanding, you're pushing me away from you. That's too hard to bear, he's saying. And he says, I'll be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. Yeah, we got that part. And whoever finds me will kill me. They'll kill me. So if you summarize it, here you have a food issue. You have a fellowship issue also with who God is. You're going to be pushed away from the presence of God in that sense. He understands that he'll be a vagrant and a wanderer. He'll never really have a home because of this limitation. And that also, he's also never going to be secure. So God presumptively, from when we read this, brought that security to Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve in the place where they were. It was a safe place. Now you're being pushed out into a place where you're always going to be vulnerable. Your security's gone. And so Cain reads into all this. He gets it. And he says, that's too much to bear. I'll be hanging out there vulnerable in more ways than one, and even to other people who want to kill me, maybe because they see me as bad seed. And so, justice-wise, we need to take him out. But whatever it is, he's understanding that he is as vulnerable as his brother was just a few minutes ago. Someone can come and kill me because I'm going to be out of your presence, God. He's really hearkening back to many of the promises that God made, not only to Adam and Eve in the garden, but later to the nation of Israel and then to us. He says, I want to be a God who is a protector, who's a provider, who's close and near as fellowship. There's all these things that I want to be with you as God. But if you choose to vamoose, you'll lose all that, and all that comes from my hand. This is the beginning of the themes of God as Father in the entire. This is what he wants to provide for us. He wants to feed us. He wants to provide our daily needs. Give us this day our daily bread. There it is. That's what he wants to do. He wants to be near to us. Draw near to me, and I'll draw near to you. God says all through the Bible. Cain's realizing that's now going to the end. A home, I'll provide a home for you. And where's your home? Wherever God is in that sense. Jesus says, the Son of Man doesn't have a place to lay his head. But basically, being with God, that's the new home. That's the new home. And then finally, it's security. It's security from the things that are crouching at the door that want to eat you. That promise to fulfill your life. So God's in that deal. And in Christ, those are the same things. So this is really the God of the Bible all the way back to Genesis 4 to Genesis 1, who wants to come back to that relationship with mankind. And Cain is telling us, I blew it. I've lost all that. And he has. Why? because he took out his brother instead of going to God. Whew. It is too great to bear. So the Lord said to him, you're going to die. No, he doesn't say that. This is where I'd squish him. Say, you're a whiner, and he'd be gone if I was writing the Bible. But he doesn't. God still in his grace does a remarkable thing. Okay, so whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. So he fixes the security issue, but he doesn't fix the other stuff. He basically says, okay, if you think everywhere you're going to wander to, people are going to try and kill you, oh, okay, I get that. So what I'll do is I'll put out a proclamation that if someone kills you, I, God, will come and visit on them even worse things sevenfold. Now, it doesn't say that he'll keep him from dying or being killed. But what he does say is, I'll have your back. And people will know that if you touch this man, sevenfold God's behind retribution and vengeance to you. What people? All the other people who are the descendants of Adam and Eve. Because you'll see in a second here that it's going to turn into a huge population. These guys have generations that will come on, and they'll live for 700, 800, 900 years, have gigantic offsprings. The earth will be populated very quickly. It's basically his first, second, third, fourth, and fifth cousins. Okay. That's who it is. So there'll be a lot of people here. So even Cain himself is going to live a long time. So that's the whole issue. There's going to be a lot of people. And it's very likely because of this family relationship that they all have with one another, they will look at Cain as being the black sheep of the family. And you'll see in a second that that's quite true. It's quite true. Speaking of Mark of Cain, that's next. And so the Lord appointed a sign for Cain so that no one finding him would slay him. Now, there's been a lot of misteaching on the Mark of Cain. A lot. And not just in the Mormon church, but like worldwide. Anyone who reads this says, well, I have a pet theory for what the Mark of Cain is. And the Mark of Cain is black skin. There we go. No, it's not black skin. Listen to what the mark's supposed to do. The mark is supposed to serve notice to people that if you kill this guy, God's going to be on your back sevenfold. So the mark probably looks a little more like this. You know I'm into pictures? Hold your judgment just for a second. That's probably more like that. You know what that is? Poisonous dart frog. And so poisonous frogs, in general, are not camouflaged. They don't blend into their surroundings. They're like neon colors. And why neon colors? To tell predators that if you eat me, you'll die the most grotesque death you can think of. Neuromuscular seizing and everything. You'll just wish you had never stepped on me or squished me with your hand. Yeah, some of the toxins on these guys not only are poisonous when they get in your bloodstream, but you just skin absorption. And you can't breathe, and you seize up, and your heart stops beating. From a beautiful little neon color. So anyway, we do not know what the mark of Cain is. But in the same way with these South African dart frogs, by the way, you know why they call them dart frogs? Darts? They would take the skin chemical and they put it on darts, and they would kill things with them. Okay, there you go. It's got to be something more like this that warns people, that flags people off and says, don't touch this guy. Don't touch this guy. And so, Cain could walk through his life, and people would somehow see this sign. We don't know what it is. I'll say it over. We just don't know what it is. But it was effective enough to serve notice to people, you better not touch this guy. That's all we know. So anytime you see the mark of Cain, think a neon-colored South American dart tree frog. Did he have like orange splotches on his face? No, that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is it's something that warned people off. It was not itself the curse. And I got to say it over again. That mark of Cain itself was not the curse. And I'll translate it more regionally. The mark of Cain as black skin was not the curse from God. Black skin is not a curse from God. This mark is a blessing and grace from God. So, just to put this in perspective, every time you have a man-made religion, which is really not man-made, it's satanically based. Every false religion is satanically based. It'll take truths and turn them upside down and make them the negatives of what they are. Which is why back in chapter 3, last time we read this, the fall suddenly becomes a good thing in some religions. No, The entire Bible says it's a bad thing. It brings sin and death. It's like, tell me what's good. There's no upsides to that. In the same way here, the mark of Cain, which is a great blessing and grace from God, in false religion, satanically, gets turned into a curse all by itself. And yet, right here, it's very clear. God, instead of wiping out Cain, says, I'll cover your back, but you got to go. Now, why would God so graciously cover Cain's back? Why didn't he just wipe him off the face of the earth? Why didn't he just hit him with a lightning bolt and vaporize him? Bad, Cain. He's gone. He doesn't do that. Even the fact that he preserves Cain, although there's consequences to his choice. Cain clearly chose not to be with God and instead to get his answers from men and to kind of nurse his anger. But even still, God doesn't vaporize him. God does not vaporize him, which gives us just the beginning glimmer of hope and grace in the entire Bible, that even though we can be heinously bent, God still wants to preserve us. For what? Remember the big picture? God, creation, rebellion, rescue, redemption, recreation, back with him. There's something about mankind and his creation of mankind that he just loves so much that even in the grotesqueness of this cold-blooded murder of Abel, God says, I still love you. Now that message also, satanic man-made religions will turn upside down. They'll say that God really doesn't love you until you kind of clean up your act, make yourself better, look good on the outside, murder, no murder, all that kind of stuff. Get yourself cleaned up, and then eventually, finally, you'll get over some bar, and God will say, oh, you're so pretty, I love you now. When in point of fact, with this right here, we're seeing the first heinous criminal of the entire Bible. God's saying, I'll preserve you. There's something about you I love. Now, the consequences of your choice, I'm not going to condone that. I'm sending you out of my presence. But I'm not wiping you out. That's a remarkable point. It's just remarkable. Okay, let's push on past the tree frog. Then Cain went from the presence of the Lord. See, the writer, actually the author, tells us that's what happened. He goes out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And by the way, names have meanings behind them in the Bible. And you know what Nod means? No, it's not that kind of Nod. It just means exile, to be put away, someplace far away. It's an away place. That's what Nod means, which is why Nod actually got worked in the English language, because when you nod off, you're going someplace else. It's exactly what it is. It's really kind of fun. So he goes and settles in the other place away. That's what Nod means, east of Eden. And by the way, whenever you see the phrase east of Eden, that's what it also is implying. You're going to an evil, bad place away from the presence of God. So east of Eden always implies, dark, mysterious, away from God, godlessness and sin. East of Eden. So that's what it's all. Okay, so how did things go in Nod? Get back there. In Nod, the away place. Well, now the writer of Genesis is going to tell us how things worked with Cain after that. Well, 17. So Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived. By the way, who's the wife of Cain? Sister. Hey, wait a second. Could be. We don't know. We don't know. We just know that there's other females in the family, and it's one of them. There you go. Okay, speculate. So here we go. Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And Cain built a city and called the name of the city Enoch after the name of his son. So he has this first son named Enoch, and he's so proud of his son, he decides to build an entire city. How can you build a city when there's only 4 people in the world right now? Well, there's actually more. There's babies coming, so don't worry about that. Builds a city, and it could have actually been many years when Enoch was older. But here's the interesting thing. Cain is so stuck up on his son, he builds a city after him. And that kind of tells you something about the heart of Cain, because it's going to be revealed as we go on here. Who in the world has a son and says, I need to name a city after my son? Except someone who's kind of stuck up on himself and his son. That's what I'm saying. Instead of naming a city after God himself or some kind of respectful, he actually elevates his son and says, this is the city of Enoch. Great man. Yeah. So we're getting clues right here as we go along. Also, how's it going in Nod, verse 18? Now to Enoch was born Irad, and that's not Iran, it's Irad. which, by the way, means, it comes from a word that means streams flowing away. It means flowing away. So this, Cain went to Nod, the away place. Irad is one of the away stream people. There's a lot of symbolism here. So Irad, who's the father of Mehujael. Mehujael also is connected to the word stream that flows away. And Mehujael became the father of Methushael. By the way, parents, keep these in your list for new babies coming. And Methushael became the father of Lamech. We wanted to get to Lamech because something interesting is going to happen with Lamech right here. So we don't know much about those guys in between, but we're going from Cain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations later. So, and by the way, remember, in the Old Testament, when you check out the ages of these guys, they live 700, 800, and 900 years long. Cain's probably still alive, and it seems like they're fertile for 100, 200, 300, 400 years. You can make a lot of babies in the lifetime of one person. So that's all I'm saying. There's a lot of people that are coming out. This is the line that comes down from Cain through Enoch. Now Lamech, we're going to focus on him for a second. This is still out in the land of Nod. Lamech took for himself 2 wives. First polygamist in the Bible. Lamech. Which, if you go back to Genesis 2, God created Adam and Eve, and then they leave their homes and cleave to one another and shade. There's no polygamy in Genesis 2 in the creation of man and wife. So this is clearly a departure from God's plan as well. And the reader, especially the Jewish reader, would read this and say, shame, shame, shouldn't have done that. So we're seeing that in the line of Cain and through Enoch and into Lamech, we're breaking rules everywhere. Well, he's breaking rules here. Lamech took to himself 2 wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. Zillah, which is the second half of Godzilla. Okay, just in case you were wondering. No, it's not at all. That's every time I see that name, I go, Zillah. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I can't remember which. You'll have to check me on it. But one of those two words means pleasure or pleasurable. So it'd be funny if it was the Godzilla side. I can't remember which. Okay, so he has 2 wives, Adah and Zillah. And Adah gives birth to Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock, just in case you wondered who those guys were who wandered in the desert. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of those who played the lyre and the pipe. So he was big into culture and stuff like that. So we got Jabal and Jubal, and then the Zillah side over here. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Oh, actually, Naamah. She's the one whose name means pleasure. Now I remember now. Weak mind. So that's Naamah. So you have Tubal-Cain and you have Naamah. Yeah, poor kid is right. So this is what's going on. Now, if you're thinking, why are we even studying? Why did he put this in the Bible? I don't get this. Well, some of the names, when you go through genealogies, have hookups with history that comes later. So you have to many times go into a Bible dictionary and kind of look around. You find some fascinating stuff. But right here for now, the writer of Genesis wants us to focus on Lamech for a second. And he's going to close out the whole history in Nod with Lamech. Lamech, the end of that line we talked about, even though he's had these 2 wives. You need the 2 wives because of what Lamech is going to claim next. And Lamech says to his wife, and this is actually in the form of a song or a poem, he says, Adah and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech, give heed to my speech. And there's a little bit more coming. But doesn't it sound like he's going to reprimand them or something? Like, I'm in charge of your universe, and you need to do everything I say. Something like that. I'll never name a city after you unless you do what I say, or something. I don't know what it is. But he sounds like he's going to come down on Adah and Zillah pretty hard right here. Okay, well, Adah and Zillah, listen to my voice. You wives of Lamech, you wives, their definition of who they are is they're wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech. And he says, for I have killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. That's not just a veiled threat. It's a threat. He's basically saying, when people just even slightly offend me, I off them. And it is a veiled threat to the wives in a sense. Well, not a sense. It really is. It's like, in one particular case, I killed a man for just wounding me. I mean, he kind of went, scratch, you're dead. Or even, what's the second case? It's gross. A boy for striking me. What can a boy do to you? Maybe he was throwing a ball with his friend one day, and the ball went off course, and it hit Lamech. And boom, and it struck him. And Lamech said, you're dead. And he was. Now we're starting to get a picture for how grotesque the line of Cain through Enoch has become. So now you have Lamech, who's telling his wives, stay in line because I have a reputation. I have a reputation that someone even just slightly nicks me. They're dead. They're dead. And then if you think that's bad enough, he amps it up before he finishes. It gets even worse. He says, if Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Now, why does that amp it up? What did God say to Cain before he pushed him out of the area? He said, I'll give a sign to you so that if anyone touches you, I'll visit it on them sevenfold. Remember that? Who does the sevenfold? God does. Lamech is saying, if you think God was covering Cain's back, I am covering my back 77-fold. I can bring vengeance and retribution on anyone who even touches me so much more than God ever did for my ancestor Cain. Now that is the peak of blasphemy. The peak of blasphemy. Because he's also saying that if God ever wounds me, I'm going to take God out. I mean, he's implying some really strong things here. I am more powerful than God was even more powerful to intercede on the behalf of Cain. That's what I'm like invincible. Oh, I'm invincible. And I'm a bad dude. And I'm nasty. And don't cross my path. And someday in the history of the world, he died and stood in front of God. And God judged him and said, what were you thinking? The creator of the universe. I mean, that's blasphemy squared, cubed, quadrupled. It's way over the top. Way over the top. And so the bottom line is we close out the history of the life in the land of Nod. You get down to this guy Lamech, who makes some of the most bold, blasphemous claims against the power of God and for himself. And that's the family of Cain. It started with Cain and Abel. Is this where the Lamanites came from? No. Okay, and just so you don't get totally depressed about what's going on in Genesis 4, there's a good side. Yay! So here's a good side. So that's where he goes next. Well, he says right here, as we move on to the next verse, in verse 25. So Adam, we're going back to Adam. Oh, they're still around. So Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. For she said about Seth, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. So, when Cain left town, Adam and Eve, where's the sons? And there could have been other sons. I'm not saying there weren't. But what she's saying is that we need someone to replace Abel because my other son took him down. So Seth, names have translations. Seth in Hebrew means appointed, planned, appointed. And that's why it says right there. She actually explains herself. I'm going to name him appointed because God has appointed a replacement. Isn't that cool? Names have meanings. So Seth comes around, and an amazing thing happens. We're going to go down his line. So to Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. And I'll tell you what that means next week. And then after that, after Seth and Enosh, this incredible phrase closes out Genesis 4. He says, do you see this? Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord after Seth and Enosh. What is going on? See, we went down Cain's line all the way to Lamech and went, wow, stinky. And you got this incredibly proud, blasphemous guy at the end of that. But here down on Seth's side, the replacement, the appointed replacement side, we start down with Seth and Enosh, and then the writer stops and says, and from that point on in the genealogy, men they just started to begin to call on the name of the Lord. There's a fork right here. Yes, something's going on. And this should whet your appetite for next week. Because what happened? What happened that all of a sudden men started calling on the name of the Lord as opposed to the Cain-Lamech side that turned into such a grotesque, horrible, proud thing? What is going on? And where is it going to go? And what happens in this genealogy that they begin to call on the name of the Lord? Is it evidence somehow? I mean, what? So to the listener, especially the Jewish listeners, they listen to this story. They go, okay, So where's this going? There's hope in this story because Cain and his guys all got sent out to Nod, but now the people who come out of Seth, Seth was directly appointed. Seth was God's plan. Seth was God's plan. That's what appointed means. And now somewhere in that plan, men start to begin to call on the name of the Lord. By the way, this call upon the name of the Lord, we hear that phrase a lot, don't really give much thought about what it means. But when you see the name of the Lord, when you see the name, every time you see name in the Old Testament, because names have meaning, think reputation. That's a better way to look at it. Reputation, because a name reflected the reputation of who that person was. It showed on the outside who the inside person was. And so for many great people in the Old Testament, their accomplishments would change their name because their reputations changed. That's why in the New Testament, when Jesus is with Peter, and Peter makes an incredibly great proclamation, Jesus changes his name because it reflects the new person inside. So here he's saying they began to call on the reputation, the status, the nature, the character of God. They started to take him seriously, who God was. And what did they do? They didn't give assent. They called on him, which means they appealed to him for life. That's what it's saying. So somewhere after these two guys in this genealogy, men began to call upon the reputation of God and to seek him. That's what it's all about. So that's what's going to happen. Now, read ahead into Genesis 5, because that's next, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Genesis 5 is just all the people that followed Adam, Seth, Enosh, all the way up to guess who? Noah. And just to whet your appetite a little bit, I'll tell you a secret before we finish. So here's what we learned in Genesis 4. We have the line of Cain that goes through Enoch and Irad, Mahaziel, Methushael, and Lamech, and then all the four sons down there. We know that ended up with Lamech, who was incredibly proud, incredibly blasphemous, shook his fist at God's power and said he was 77 more than him. And then you have Abel, who unfortunately was killed, so he's upside down in the grave. And then you have this line of Seth and Enosh, which ends with this intriguing phrase, then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So now as readers, we are intrigued to find out what changes, what happens on this side of the line. So next week, we're going to fill in all these guys, and I'm going to give you a clue. Names mean something. If you take the names of Adam through Noah, it talks about the coming of Christ. Yeah. So we'll talk about that next week. It's very simple. Just read through Genesis 5, and you may not see it. If you've got some word study books, you can look up the meaning of names. Just write down the meaning of the names and make a sentence of them. You tell me what you find. But if you don't have those tools, I'll do it for you next week. And we'll look at how God fixes the problem of the rebellious by himself interceding for mankind. Remember, that's the rest of the story of the Bible. And it'll actually be written for us, the names going to Noah. So you don't want to miss that. Even though you know how the story ends. Okay, let's pray. Father, we thank you again for your extraordinary and shocking loving kindness for us. And how amazing it is that your grace is extended to us who, like Cain, many times prefer to open doors of selfish and prideful and self-destructive sin. And Lord, how it is you don't blot us off the face of the earth, or like the psalmist writes, if you were to count sin, which one of us could stand? And that's just definitely true. And yet there, persevering through the universe, is your loving kindness. And we hear the echoes of the psalmist who say, the Lord's loving kindness is everlasting. And God, we don't understand that, but we have experienced it through your loving kindness to us through Christ, that you have paid the price to redeem us from the wrath of our own self-destruction and sin, and you have remade us, that we might know you and be with you and be delighted in you. So, Lord, I pray that as we continue in Genesis, you would continue through your Spirit to point out where the echoes of that started in the earliest parts of creation, the promise that God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that we wouldn't be estranged anymore, and we might find love and fellowship with you. So thank you for all you do for us, and our hearts remain amazed. Thank you for teaching us. In Jesus' name, amen.